Vow 88.1. Good times, good music, for good.
For good. We really understand and appreciate the importance of research and the role it plays in bettering ourselves, society, and the entire learning process. Well, today all of that changes as we will be shining a light on the remarkable yet often overlooked contributions of the WITS Gauteng City Region Observatory. My name is Khanyisile Yende and I'm your host for this Vow News exclusive. So here's a bit of background on the center. The WITS Gauteng City Region Observatory is a research center that generates data and intelligence to support the development of a more integrated and sustainable Gauteng province. It is a collaborative initiative between the University of Witwatersrand and the University of Johannesburg, as well as the Gauteng provincial government and organized local government. Joining us for this conversation is Rashid Seedat, who is a executive director of the GCRO. A very good morning to you, and thank you for allowing us into your space this morning.
Good morning, Khanyisile, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Let's start with the basics from the inception of the center and to the collaborators, as well as the problems identified which ultimately led to its inception.
So some 17 years ago, in fact, it was November 17 years ago that the GCRO was established formally. But it took quite a long process before that. There was this idea of collaboration between the provincial government, at that time led by Mbazima Shilowa, and the vice chancellors of WITS and UJ, and they cooked up this idea of establishing an urban observatory, which is what we are. We don't look up to the sky; we look down to our urban environment in Gauteng to understand the dynamics of this particular space that we call Gauteng.
And still staying within your core mission, you describe yourself as one of your goals is to build knowledge for a competitive as well as a sustainable and socially inclusive Gauteng city region. In practical terms, what does that mission translate to on a day-to-day basis? When you walk into this office, how are you contributing to that mission?
Well, primarily through data collection and research.
Okay.
So to better understand what we're dealing with on an ongoing basis. So if we talk about, say, the economy, we usually talk about an inclusive economy. In other words, an economy that actually is not to the benefit of a few, but basically benefits, the majority of people, to ensure things like unemployment is addressed. So it's not just about growth, but growth that would lead to broader societal benefits, for example. That's one area. The other would be, say, on the environment, water quality, for instance. Then the big issue around governance, so governance at the provincial level, but also as far as municipalities are concerned. So to understand so I'm, for example, involved in a project at the moment where we're analyzing local government in Gauteng to understand what are the sort of governance issues, what are the financial issues, and so on, so that that will then contribute to better policies into the future.
Yes, and you've already touched on that, but your research at the center, it covers diverse themes from transport to sustainability. You've also mentioned addressing inequality and having the province serve the majority, unlike the minority, and also governance. How do you balance in-depth research, academic research, with timely policies that are ever-changing?
So I think we're clear about one thing, that our research is not for the ivory tower only. So we do, obviously, like serious research, published in journals and book chapters and so on, and that is part of our mandate. But at the same time, we're saying, what is the impact of our work? And the impact of our work should be broad for society as a whole. So can our work, any given piece of work, say, contribute to change of policy, as I mentioned? Could it be used by civil society organizations for greater advocacy, for example? Could it be used by business and labor in relation to improving our economic performance? So whatever we do, we always ask the question, how can that research actually benefit us going forward.
And let's talk about your role as the executive director on a day-to-day basis. What is involved, and how are you advancing the betterment of the center, as well as its visibility? Because the work that you do is very important in bringing about change within the province.
Well, I mean, the role of the executive director is complicated because one has to play multiple roles at the same time.
Okay.
The one is an outward-facing role. In other words, engagement with stakeholders. So engagement with provincial government, with municipalities, engagement with the universities that are our partners on an ongoing basis. I'll give you an example. On the 4th of December, the Premier of Gauteng is going to be signing an MOU with all of the public universities in Gauteng to advance it. So we're working with the provincial government to advance that particular thing. So that's one example of how we try to be an interface between the world of academia and the world of governance, because we have a unique partnership which doesn't really exist anywhere else. So that's an external facing, but of course internally it is about looking at the strategy of the organization on an ongoing basis to ensure that we are governing the GCRO effectively, managing it effectively, that staff are productive, that the focus of our work is there. You raise the issue about the impact of our work, so always ask the critical questions to all of our staff. Oh, you're doing this, so why are you doing it? Why is it important? You see, so there are multiplicity of roles that I would play as the ED or any executive director would play on an ongoing basis to ensure that you have this outward-looking role and an inward-looking role, and basically how you take things forward.
And working with the government, how easy or complicated is that? Because we do know, and in some aspects of their work, they're very sluggish, and how does that hamper or accelerate the process of gathering information within the center as well as the province? How does it work working with the government that is known to be not so on the ball?
So let me tell you something.
Okay.
That I started here at Wits University in guess what year? My first year, 1981. I know you may not have been born.
No,
okay?
I wasn't.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, that was my first year at university, right?
Okay.
And then I was very active in student politics, in what is then called the Black Student Society, for example. So I see myself as an activist. And when 1994 happened, which is a very important moment for all of us, because we were working for this fundamental change, and it happened. And I worked in government for 26 years.
Okay.
So I worked in the city of Johannesburg for 16 years. 10 years I was in the mayor's office, basically as the head of strategic planning. And then another 10 years I was in the premier's office in Gauteng, basically also as the head of planning. So I understand government very well.
Yes.
And that's why they appointed me in part, because, so for me, the issue about working with government is not a problem. I understand how government works.
Okay.
And I think there are a lot of, misunderstandings. So everyone thinks that government officials are a bunch of lazy bums. Okay, pardon my language. Let me finish.
Yeah.
There is that perception, but I can tell you a lot of the senior officials in government really work very hard. I mean, they work after hours. I mean, I can tell you in the university environment, people want to work 9 to 5.
Yes.
Okay. That's the reality of it. I mean, academics and the admin staff and so on. In government, if you're a senior official, you really put in your, put in the effort. So I understand what it is like from that side, and that's why. But I also understand the world of research. So it's basically, for me, the role is being that bridge between these two worlds.
Yes. You touched on how this is one of a kind, this observatory, and this is an observatory that's a very unique partnership, because it's not just this institution, but the University of Johannesburg as well. How did this specific collaborative model come about, and how is it effective having two very important universities within the province work together?
Well, I think that's a really important question, because sometimes the two universities, for example, are seen to be in competition, okay? And I don't think it's a bad thing, as long as it's not destructive. It's a more productive, constructive type of competition, which I think, the fact that, they are adjacent to one another,
yes.
I think is a really important point, okay? And in my day, actually, there were very different institutions. Wits was this liberal university, and then that was called Rand Afrikaans University. They were like in another planet in a way, right? And they also combined with the Vista universities in Soweto, for example, the old apartheid universities for African people, and the Wits Technikon, as it was called, and then became UJ. And UJ, I think, has been very successful. I think they're about 20 years old now, as the University of Johannesburg. They've transformed quite fundamentally. Last night I was actually at an event where one of our board members, who's now moving on, there was a farewell function for her, and they were talking about how UJ has changed from what it was. So in a way, they're competing in a similar kind of area, but it's very interesting that the GCRO is the one institute, or one of maybe some institutions and collaborations that they understand that they need to work cooperatively. So it's there's this term, it's called co-opetition, right?
Okay.
You cooperate and you compete at the same time in a constructive way, and I think that's what we see in our relationship between WITS and UJ.
And upon doing research for the center and the work that you do, I was like inundated with information. It's just so much to go through, so much that you're reading, and I just had this thought of what does it take to gather all this information, because it cuts across so many fields, so many sectors, so many organizations. And what's the process of developing a major project that you're also running currently, which is the quality of life survey? And how easy or difficult is it when you have to involve so many key players in making it a success and accurate?
Well, the first point to make is that it's not me and one or two others. When we're in a full complement, including postdocs and other people, we're about 25 people. And I said at least 20 are full time. Okay. We have some very highly qualified people. We've got about 7 people who have PhDs, for example. Okay, so we're talking about people, and even people who have masters. Usually, if they come into the GCRO, they got good master's degrees. They pass with distinction, etc., etc. And they're also on the road to doing their PhD. Yes. So that's the sort of people that we have, and I think in the history of the GCRO, we've been very fortunate to have that caliber of people. So a lot of the people are self-driven, okay, and we make sure that in the staff complement that people have their speciality, but also have a very sort of interdisciplinary approach. In other words, it's not like, okay, I'm an economist, I only do economic stuff.
Yes.
You could do finance stuff. You could do, in fact, we have one colleague who's doing stuff on poverty and inequality, but also on inclusive economies, if you see what I'm saying. So straddle more than one of our 9 thematic areas that we have. Okay, and so it's very much an organic process about how we arrive at research projects. So a lot of it is developed through our partnership with provincial government. So we have regular engagements with them because they are our primary funders by far. And so what do you have in mind and so on? What are really important things to further develop policies and programs for the provincial government across? There are 15 departments, right? It's not a small place. It's got like tens of thousands of staff members. It's a big institution. And we do the same with local government and so on. But we also would say, okay, what are we individually interested in? And all of that is then cooked up into a set of about 40 odd projects that we do. And our staff members would basically there'll be more than one person on a project. And we don't, they're not in silos, which is a really interesting thing. So we don't have like, okay, you in inclusive economies, you in poverty and inequality, whatever. We allow people to straddle the different research areas, although there are 9 thematic areas, but within them are contained those projects, but the staff members who actually do that, basically cross-pollinate.
Yes.
And so that's the approach. And let me just pick up on the issue about quality of life survey. So that's something that's really important for us. We've done 7 of them in our 17 years of existence. They are massive undertakings, right? it's one of the largest social surveys in the country after the census. I think people need to understand that because we do face-to-face surveys of something like 14,000 people, households. So it is a big job. It takes, I mean, this field work alone takes at least a year, right? And we have a hit rate of about 50%. In other words, for every 2 homes you go, only one will actually agree to do an interview. And sometimes you have to go back multiple times. They say, oh, come back in a few days, and so on and so on. So it's quite a big job. It costs a lot of money, but the data that comes out of it is absolutely invaluable. The chair of our board is Professor Lynn Morris, who's the Deputy Vice Chancellor here at WITS for research. And she asked us, well, I mean, who's using all the data,
yes,
right? Besides the work that we're doing? So we asked the repository that holds all of our data, longitudinal data, and we found it was incredible. I mean, there were thousands of people downloading our data from universities. So a lot of lecturers and students using them for across the country. It's used by research institutions like a lot of top universities like Sciences Po in France, Harvard, some really top universities, and then many multilateral organizations like the World Bank and IMF and so on. So it is really an important thing, but we also use that to do our own analysis as well. Yes. I mean, you got this huge data set. You can do 101 different things, depending on what your research question is. So that's what we do internally. So that's a very important part of what we do.
Yes, and you've already touched on the likes of Harvard, who go into your database and look at the work that you've done. And it brings me to my next question, that you also engage in international collaborations, such as the African Metropolitan Governance and Infrastructure Network. What is the strategic value of these global partnerships for a region-focused observatory?
So yes, we have many partnerships, international partners. But like internationalization is one of our strategic priorities and agreed to by the board. Just in general, before I give you some specific examples, I mean the idea is really it enriches us and enriches them on a two-way process. So they learn from us, we learn from them. And if you want to keep up with what's going on in the latest trends, I mean you have to engage internationally. And I think in simple terms that's what what the motivation is. So the one partnership we have is that we are members of something called the UN Habitat, a global urban observatory network. I happen to be the deputy chairperson of the steering committee, the global steering committee, so we have. In that network, urban observatories throughout the world, in Latin America, in places like Buenos Aires, for example, a couple in Brazil. In Africa, there aren't that many, right? A few in Egypt, but they're also part of the Middle East region in a way, but obviously on the continent as well. Quite a lot in the Middle East itself, like Saudi Arabia is a big thing, and so on, and Asia. And Europe. So we basically learning from one another about how urban observatories should work, how you should use your data. The big new questions like AI, comes up in a big way, for example. So that's what I mean. I can go on, but that's one example. The other one that you mentioned was the we now call it AGAIN, which is the Africa Governance and Infrastructure Network. And there, what we're trying to do is basically to look at this idea of metropolitan governance. So it's not just like a local government or city government, but for metropolitan areas. So Gauteng is a metropolitan region, if you like. There are many definitions of these things, but say the city of Johannesburg, Tshwane, and Ekurhuleni are all metro municipalities by themselves. Each of them have populations in excess of 4 to 5 million people, right? So we're talking about big places in global terms, okay? And so, but there are many emerging. So what's happened in the last, say, 25 years or so, is that there's been acceleration of metropolitan areas on the continent. The obvious ones are obviously Lagos, Gauteng, Cairo, Kinshasa, and so on. But you're also having that phenomenon in a number of other African cities. So what we're saying is that the one problem you have is on the governance side is that they're not being effectively governed. So you might have a municipality, but the region is much bigger. So you say you've got a core city of, say, Cairo, for example.
Okay.
And I've been, like last year, we were in Cairo. So there's a municipality there. But actually, Greater Cairo has expanded very, very substantially. So how do you govern that place? How do you ensure effective spatial planning? How do you ensure effective economic development and public transport?
Yes.
So that's a kind of idea that we are looking at in terms of learning from one another, and also doing some global advocacy. So in other words, taking it to UN structures, for example, and say, and pressing national governments around the world to say, you need to focus on this. Our focus is on the continent, but also we are engaging with people in Europe and other places in Latin America to advance that agenda.
Bring it back home.
Yeah.
At the local government elections were last year. No, this is the previous local elections. What were your takeaways and your observances from that?
So the biggest issues that we have observed is that there's been a major decline in basically in service delivery and good governance, right? And that is borne out. It's not just a statement we're making. It's borne out by our quality of life survey, where the levels of dissatisfaction amongst ordinary residents is at its lowest point in any survey that we've done, right? So. And because people can see deteriorating services, they can see, they're being taxed more and more in terms of rates and service charges, and so on and so on. So it's all of those sorts of things that are weighing down on individuals, households, and communities. And that has led to kind of quite a profound dissatisfaction, which in turn has created a situation where there's been a kind of a splintering effect in terms of who people are voting for.
Yes.
So in the past, the majority of people vote for the ANC, finishing klar. That's how it was. But now, there are more sort of the other parties on the table, and people are getting attracted to them. That is leading to the consequence of hung councils. In other words, there aren't clear majorities.
Okay.
Right. And which then have to create coalitions. The coalitions, in many cases, are very unstable. And instability is the biggest danger. I told you I worked in the city of Joburg for 16 years. Yeah. I know what I'm talking about, okay, if I may say so. And if you don't have stability, you can't provide effective leadership to the organization because people are pulling in different directions, okay, and you have council meetings and then they collapse and then you have to reconvene them and so on, so you can't make decisions. Like you say, it's taken a year or even I don't know how long, say just for the city of Joburg to appoint the city manager, right? It was backwards and forwards. Eventually they have, and it's only for a 2-year contract. Only for 2 years. Yes. Right? And then they're going to start the process again. You see, and the reason they do that is because of the instability that exists, and they need to kind of make deals and so on. So I think that for me, that was the biggest thing that happened in the last 2 local government elections, actually, and is likely to happen in the next one. So it's not only Johannesburg, it's all, many of the municipalities face the same thing. And Gauteng, you've got the 80-20 principle. The 80% is basically the 3 big metros, Joburg, Ekurhuleni, and Tshwane, right? And they all will face this issue, and many of the local municipalities will also face this issue. So I think that for me, the one big sort of thing that we have to think about into the future is how do we ensure the effective sort of management of coalitions. Coalitions, by the way, is nothing new around the world. Many very democratic countries basically have coalitions, right? But they manage them in a good way. So what they would do is that they would set up, say, a charter of some sort, and basically say, okay, as political parties are working together, we agree to the following set of principles and so on, and working arrangements and programs and so on and so on. Yes. Right? Look, the government of national unity has survived, right? I think that's remarkable. Given the sort of ideological differences between some of the major parties that exist, but they've been able to, through good leadership, been able to keep it together, right? So that's what we need at local government level, to make sure that you're able to keep this thing together in a way in which is to the benefit of citizens.
Yes.
I mean, I think it's really important. I mean, you know, I assume all of you live in Joburg or something. I mean, the quality of the environment in the run-up to G20 has really been great. I mean, they've really done, in a relatively short period, have done a good job of getting. So what we need is that kind of single-minded focus, which says this is what you're going to do.
Yes.
I mean, I did an interview with the Financial Times in London recently, and I said to the person just before G20, and I said to the interviewer, actually, just look at some of the past things that have happened, right? For example, the World Cup. In the run-up to 2010 World Cup, I mean, some of you are a bit young, I know, around here, but anyway, so you may have a vague sense of it, but
yes.
I mean, I worked in the city of Joburg at the time, and from the mayor downwards, we basically put our shoulder to the wheel. We were like single-minded our focus, and we produced one of the most amazing World Cup. Joburg, for example,
yes,
basically had the opening ceremony, the opening and the closing, and many other things. We had two stadiums. We had FNB Stadium, Soccer City, and we had Ellis Park, and we had several training venues. Okay, and we started the BRT system. Like, we did amazing stuff. You can do it.
yes,
Right. But I think sometimes now the fractious politics gets in the way. So how do you address that?
And I'm glad you touched on that, because you mentioned how the GNU has survived, and to have an effective government, they need to thrive. Through the work that you do, what would be the go-to in terms of the parties coming together to effectively work and basically have the same vision for the province and the government of South Africa at large?
So, I mean, let me just say that the National Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, COGTA National, are piloting legislation through Parliament at the moment. The Parliament will rise, but they'll start in the new year. Hopefully, before the next local government elections, which are basically at the end of 2026, so it's like down the line. Okay, what they intend to do there is basically to regulate how these coalition arrangements. So, for example, something like a vote of no confidence. If you have a vote of no confidence every week, you just it's a recipe for stability. Now, you can't say you can't have votes of no confidence, but you can regulate the intervals, between them. So once in 3 months, once in 6 months, whatever, so that you limit that thing, right, and allow for breathing space for the people who are in charge to actually proceed. So that's one issue. The other issue, which actually is, I mean, you've raised at the national level, they have something. It's called the Statement of Intent,
okay,
right? Which basically the major parties who are part of the GNU have signed into. And that's what the president always bring them back to and say, I mean, there's this tension, there's education, this bill, there's PE. I mean, there's those sorts of tensions. So what do? You basically say, let's go back to the basics in terms of what we've agreed to and take them forward.
Yes.
And so I think that's a good way of so it's important for accountability and transparency. In other words, it's not deal making, like sort of cynical deal making that sort of politicians do, as we understand it in the sort of popular media, but rather a systematic kind of approach where citizens are aware of what government intends or what this coalition intends to do.
Yes.
Look, none of this is basically like a silver bullet, right? I mean, we also have to, it's real life. You have to make it work, and you have to cooperate with one another, etc., etc.
Yes. Do you see it happening in the near future? I mean, for the longest of time, we've always known that there's been bickering amongst these parties. Will there come a time where our government is in harmony and they all agree on policies and just the leadership of the country? Because, like you've mentioned, everyone is just pulling in different directions, and that's delaying the process of progress.
Look, I mean, in a multi-party democracy, you're never going to get agreement, and actually that's part of the deal. You have to accept that, right? And that's why you've got different political parties. You have factions within political parties and so on, right? I mean, that's how it is.
And is that not also a contributor to that?
It is for sure. I think factionism is a big problem, but but let's just put that aside for the moment. But what I'm saying is that it's that you will always have policy differences.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean that's the nature of these things. But what you have to agree to is basically a minimum agenda, and what is it that you want. Let me give you an example of one of the most famous documents in South Africa called the Freedom Charter, which you've heard about, adopted in 26 June 1955. And if you read that document, right, it's like even some of the language is a bit outdated because it was written at a particular time. But the underlying principles were basically contained in the 1996 Constitution. Okay. So it means even from 1955 to 1996, I mean, 40 odd years later, I mean, some of those things held together, right?
Yes.
So it's in the same spirit that I'm talking about this, in saying, how do you basically use, find common ground, and that's on the basis of what you take forward. And say, okay, let's compromise in this way where there are big policy differences, like PE, like a big one, or things like that.
And as we wrap up our conversation, government elections are taking place, local government elections are taking place next year. What is it that you're looking forward to as an observatory center in terms of the findings from that movement towards the end of the year when we take to the polls as a government, citizens of South Africa in our local governments?
Well, look, I mean, I think that from our point of view, we want to, we've actually focused quite a lot on local government research. So there are several pieces of research that will be coming out in the next couple of months. We'll be rolling them out in 2026 in the run-up to the local government election. So that's one sort of issue. The other contribution, I'm just saying, is I'm not sure if you're aware, but the National Department of Cooperative Governance, COGTA, is working on a white paper for local government, which is basically a new policy for local government, which will only be implemented after the elections, but basically to set the policy framework. We for example, have made one major sort of submission earlier this year, and we think there might be another sort of bite of the cherry in terms of taking that process forward. So from a policy point of view, we want to say, like, these are some of the things that we think need to be addressed. There are issues around governance, transparency, issues around local government finance, and so on. The structures of local government. Do you need a two-tier model, district and local municipality model? All sorts of issues that we need to deal with, which we've contributed to that debate, and which we will continue to do in the new year, so that we, in our little way, hopefully cumulatively with other contributions, I mean, we can basically create a stable system of local government. And it's not just for its own sake. I mean, local government is often touted as in fact, there's a famous phrase, the first minister of the RDP was J. Naidu in the Nelson Mandela government. And he called local government the hands and feet of the RDP, of the Reconstruction Development Program. And what he meant was that, I mean, it's where service delivery actually happens, right? Not entirely true, because the national and provincial government departments, they do many service delivery things, but a lot of what citizens face on a day-to-day basis happens at that level. Like, the biggest issue at the moment is water. I mean, I'm saying it's like, 10, 15 years ago, nobody gave it a second thought. But people who have taps and have infrastructure, when they open the tap, the water is not flowing. That's a serious damn thing, right? So it's kind of moving and seeing how do we address some of those issues.
Yes. And in closing, voter participation in terms of the youth, what do you anticipate in terms of the work that you do and the numbers that you have? Because the youth have thought to themselves, we've been voting and nothing has happened that favors us as a young generation. Do you think that our morale as young people is low? Do you think it can be revived with hope of we can actually, take this country to the heights it belongs to?
I think it's a crisis.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that there's so much apathy. I mean, I come from a generation where we all voted, right? Everyone voted because
Yeah.
after 1994, I mean, this is the thing, we never did it before in our lives, and now suddenly we're given this wonderful instrument, okay, as citizens, right? And then, like, with time, I mean, that sort of apathy starts creeping in. A lot of it has to do with youth unemployment and a sense of like hopelessness in a way.
Yes.
I mean, I think it's up to society as a whole. I mean, so it's political parties, it's government, it's business, it's labor. Everyone needs to say, okay, how do we basically kind of revive the spirit of democracy in general? Because, I mean, even, it's not only the youth. I mean, a lot of other apathy exists in other sectors, older people as well, right? I mean, this is a waste of time. So
Yes.
I think just that sense of political education or citizens' education about, your rights and obligations as citizens becomes very important. But at the same time, I mean, I think there are two sides to that coin. The one is like, trying to say, please do this, is important, blah, blah, blah. The other side of the coin is to make sure that the concerns, I mean, particularly unemployment and so on, and access to education, etc., is basically, I mean, we're beginning to fix those things. I'm an optimist, okay?
Yes.
Okay, and let me just say this. There are things, a year and a half ago, we were in the midst of the worst load shedding you could ever imagine, okay? Right? And it was like a hopeless situation. Today, I mean, people have forgotten the word load shedding and what it means,
Yes.
right? I mean, in the past, a 4-year-old would tell you the meaning of load shedding.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying, right? But if it carries on this way, ask a 4-year-old in 5 years' time, have they heard the word? They'll say no.
Yes.
I mean, if we maintain.
Continues,
So
yes.
it's that kind of sense of like, okay, you put your focus, you kind of, because I think we have the capability, the resources, and so on. And of course, I think very importantly, I think action is being taken against corruption. I was like, do you hear what Ket Matlala said yesterday?
Yeah.
He said he gave 500,000 rand to
Bheki
Cele. I mean, really?
Yes.
500,000 rand. I mean, in cash.
Yes, to an entire
I'm just saying,
minister.
in cash. Okay, so, but some of that nonsense is coming out now,
Yes.
right? And and I think a lot of resources were diverted. I mean, take Tembisa Hospital, one hospital. It's not even an academic hospital, right? You're able to basically tap millions out of it. What skinny jeans? You buy skinny jeans. I mean, how absurd is that?
Very
Right?
much
So
so.
I'm just saying, but I think it's important that the move towards like cleaning out
Yes.
the state and freeing up resources. Because there are resources, right? And
Plenty.
then that will give us the basis. I'm not saying it's the only answer, but it's it's basically a happy coincidence of everything coming together, and so that you create an upward spiral, not the downward spiral that we've been in. And basically that's what we need.
I've said that was the last question, but this is the last question.
Sure.
How serious is the government with regard to listening and taking action, the action that is needed by citizens? Because it seems as if we have rallied as a people, but it seems as if they laxed about standing up and fulfilling the duties that we've appointed them to do.
I think that they're getting the message.
Yes.
And you know where you get the message? You know where it hurts?
Where?
At the ballot box.
Okay.
And I think that the complacency that we've seen, say in the ANC, and I'll tell you, I mean, I come from that tradition, okay, historically, you know what I mean. But the ANC became corrupt and complacent, okay, and I think that it's knocking them at the ballot box. And so they understand that better than anyone. So a lot of the things that I'm saying, the issues around electricity, or freight and logistics, the focus on the economy, all of those sorts of things are basically, and the work, the anti-corruption work. A lot of it in the early years were done by civil society. Civil society making a big noise, really important part in the democracy, and saying this is wrong, blah blah blah, and then there's been a process now. So the commissions of inquiry and so on, I think the way in which we need to sort of begin to unpack what are the issues and take action. And the fact, and people are getting arrested. I mean, you see it almost every day in appearing in court and so on. And I think that's what we want to see. More people in orange suits.
Yes. That's the only way.
Indeed.
And that brings us to the end of our conversation. Thank you so much for your time. That is Mr. Rashid Seedat, who is the Executive Director for the Gauteng City Region Observatory. And once again, all is a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Vow 88.1. Good times, good music, for good.
For good.